Ooh, racism. It's like living a dying life, but just surviving to live. It's one thing that I would not wish any human person, not even a living thing, to go through. It's hard for me to explain to you what it means. We are also human by nature. We learn to keep our mouths shut. For generations and generations, the victims of racism are just surviving with no peace of living.
Tell us who you are and what comes to your mind when you think about international movement against racism, for example, the International League Against Racism.
Racism. This topic of racism can be painful and fascinating to the viewers, listeners, and victims, depending on which lens one takes to analyze its experience. We all have different understanding and experience on racism. Some have been hurt directly and learning to live a surviving life in societies where they are the minority from the privileged majority. Some have lost their life and never got a right to even enjoy the international basic human rights. Some have seen racism from the distance and not ignoring the existing bitter fact that some do not even see a problem in racism. It's important to approach this conversation with a humble, opening understanding, knowing that no one has the full, absolute knowledge and understanding on racism, but relearning to openly understand racism from the voice of the lived experience of the victim. So, my name is Nampanga Robinah, commonly known as Robin, who has just graduated with a BA in International Relations, currently working as an international assistant by PT Solution and looking forward for new experience and knowledge as I wait to start my master's this year in October. To answer your question on what comes to my mind when I think about the international movements against racism, as a victim who has experienced the dehumanizing racism action behavior, I get a bit of sense and hope, wishing that at one time my race and other minority race will be at peace and enjoy their international basic human rights in the society of privileged majorities. But not ignoring the emotional anger in me, since racism, dehumanizing actions and behavior have for so long been here and abused, violated the enjoyment of victims' basic human rights, such as a right to life. Let's take a second to all remember the life of George Floyd, who was killed in a broad daylight in 2020, leading to a new movement, Black Lives Matter. I have always asked myself a question: why is it taking so long to come up with a sustainable, just mechanism that can protect the victims from such violation and abuses? These movements have not started today. Let's remember the times of Martin Luther King, Malcolm, and also Nelson Mandela. But we're still talking about racism until today, however much the movements and people suffering. But why don't we stand together to rethink the tools we can use to maximize or minimize, to prevent racism from happening again and again? Yes, many anti-racism organizations, institutions have made policies against racism and its behavior. But these policies require for an urgent, effective, practical mechanism which would make the offenders to be responsible of their actions. Since until today, this is a big problem and it's a gap that is still lacking. Let's recognize that racist people are existing and real. Let's try to rethink together on what could be the unknown problem of these racist people, by giving them thoughts of doubt that they are missing the truth that the world is now living in a global village. We are in 2022. By recognizing that racist people are missing the social human behavior of understanding the law and the policies that all races are humans and equal in this new global village. Let's bring an educational seminar to these racist offenders. Depending on the case, just like bad drivers. As a victim of racism, we are tired of waiting. We call upon all anti-racism institutions, both international and domestic organizations against racism, to come to an action. Let's remember and recognize that each second minute we are losing a life that did not even get a chance for media publicity. In quotation, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, it doesn't make sound. Racism should be a crime offense, just like stealing or bad driver users. We, the victim, request for everyone to deconstruct your before observation and perception about racism, with hope that your voice, understanding, and support would be an eye-opener for social transformation justice to the victims. So I hope that giving my voice in the international movement against racism lead to an inclusive social justice change for all, even in society where victims of racism are the minority. And not telling us, go back to your country. We are living in a global village where all races are equal.
So, Ruby, how do racist actions and behaviors dehumanize the victim's life?
Oh, there are many ways on how racist actions and behavior dehumanize the victim's life, but I will just highlight those I understand based on experience. As the victims of racism often become bitter, get anxiety, anger, hopeless, and even lose our life through violence like suicide, killing, and drug abuse. These violence happen among students and young youthful men and women out there. So, some have come to disconnect themselves from the society. Since until today, we still lack sufficient understanding and counseling on the aftermath of racism to the victim. Let's recognize that racism is not one day thing or a minute event, but it's a daily life experience to the victim, which they face in different levels, such as racial discrimination, institutional discrimination, leading to economic inequality, unfair media presentation, which is now a new way in this global digital village. For example, let's again take a minute to try to understand how many victims are still told not to make the abuser angry, where the victims are asked to justify themselves before the abuser, making the abuser less wrong, telling us it was just a joke, take it easy, feel that emotional mental torture of making the victim to revisit their pain. Considering George Floyd's case, who was put to blame defamed his character, made the abuser the hero, manipulating the case to make the abuser at least less wrong. Just put yourself in the shoes of George Floyd's family. As the victim of racism, we are also human by nature, imperfect in the majority privileged societies, where we are the minority, but several laws and policies are constructed in favor of the privileged majorities. Being a victim of racism, it's a full-time job because you learn to accept to be blamed. We learn to keep our mouths shut and learn to live as soon as possible before the abuser gets aggressive to lose our life. For generations and generations, the victims of racism are just surviving with no peace of living. Hope those statements have answered the question.
Ruby, how does racism work to achieve that end of dehumanization?
Racism. Because it is viewed as an event, not a structure. Part of racism, dehumanizing, are so intertwisted into everyday culture. In my eyes, to understand how racism or racist people has managed to achieve that end of dehumanization, it's important to get a closer understanding of its structure as a way of tackling its success. Let us look at the prejudice, discrimination that are directed against the minorities and marginalized people, who create themselves and how they have been existing. Look at the political ideologies, the media support around the beliefs, behavior, perspective, attitude which effectively affect the minority, race, and ethnic background in the privileged majority society. I think with those views, I will be answering your question if those are put into consideration.
How racism dehumanization has been ignored in society by education institutions, history, academia.
On that question, it could be agreed that in education institutions, the dominating focus is on how it should be discussed than how it should be solved. And how should the institution discuss it? On this, I'll just make one point. It can be claimed that there is fear of shame and burden of guilt because racism is an individual, collective, and structure-created problem. That could be the reason as to why it's still existing.
What is it like to be treated differently just because of the color of your skin?
Oh my God. On that question, I could say it's hard for me to explain to you what it means, but I'll draw something closer to make you understand it. It's one thing that I would not wish any human person, not even a living thing, to go through. It's like living a dying life, but just surviving to live. For those who don't know what it means, I will recommend a book known as Why We Kneel As We Rise. It's by Michael Holding. It's a new book, and it's one of the books I've been reading in these few weeks ago.
What would you like the listener to take away from your video today?
On this, I could say racism, it's a big problem. It's a big problem that has led to the loss of many lives. For example, by suicide, by one racist aggressor killing the victim because of their race. And you may not be there to see what the victim are going through, but what I want to tell you, they are not at peace. In their life, there may be an absence of war. They are not at the war, but remember, they are living a surviving life in the privileged majority society where they are the minority. So, as I told you that sometimes this leads to suicide, and I also mentioned that it's not one day event or a 1 minute event. It's an everyday experience that these victims go through. Like, for them to be treated better, it's like Christmas. Every day has to experience it, and this person doesn't know in which corner will the aggressor or the racist person going to come from. And it's from individuals, collective, and institutions. So what I want to say to a listener out there, and also the racist joker or racist abuser who is out there, you might not get a gun to shoot someone, but your actions are killing someone's life, because if someone gets tired and they commit suicide, you are the reason to their death. And also, me have experienced racism for the 5 years when I've been here. I ask myself a question: how has been the life of those minority young growing children who are born here, who are born in the societies of privileged majorities, and they are the minorities, and they share the same race like me or the same color tone like me? Do you know how miserable their life has been? Because they have told them always to keep quiet. They have learned how to survive and keep their mouth shut. Let's create peace and let's create humanity. As we talk about other sustainable problems, let's reopen our eyes and recreate a new perspective and observation on the problem of racism, because people are dying. You are the reason why someone's life is killed. You are the reason why someone is committing suicide. And you, the abuser, the racist person, you are the reason why some people are making their life toxic by drugs. Please change. We are in 2022, where this is a global village. Chances are 100% that every day you will meet another race, and people who look like me are exercising their right to movement and reallocation, and they're not here by mistake. They are here, or they are in those privileged societies because they have that right to be there. Thanks for listening.